Yes, welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Weber, and we have the extraordinary privilege today to be with our guest independent scientist, Leuren Moret, who's coming to us from Berkeley, California. Welcome, Leuren.
Thank you. How are you today?
Yes, good.
Good.
As I understand it, um, uh, in this landmark last article that you have just published on Fukushima, but going back and it surveyed the entire genesis of the nuclear industry and weapons industry. You and your colleague, Lawrence Batis, have made a discovery based on the Wigner effect and what's occurring at Fukushima. And could you summarize that for us? Because it's very important as to what the Fukushima plant has now become.
Yes. I'm going to read the quote from Mr. Battis. He is an engineer, former military, Navy. So he understands the situation at Fukushima like no one I know, except for you and me. But what he called it is, he said the Fukushima is a breeder reactor now for black dust. And he says, quote, "The Fukushima nuclear disaster has created a breeder reactor for the black dust that has been rendered in a fully and optimally weaponized condition." Now, this black dust is very radioactive. Fukushima Daiichi is now a full production facility for a highly weaponized particulate product and optimally weaponized condition. Oh, I screwed it up. Let me start again.
Okay.
The Fukushima nuclear disaster has created a breeder reactor for the black dust that has been rendered in a fully and optimally weaponized condition. Fukushima Daiichi is now a full production facility for a highly weaponized particulate product and optimally weaponized particulate product. I doubt if you will ever find anything better to render death to an enemy than Wigner dust. Fukushima is an industrial plant for creating the dust, the worst weaponized powder ever created, Wigner dust, with one exception: radioactive nanoparticles. And the process of making this dust is enough to kill the entire planet, much less the continuous dust releases for thousands of years.
Well, that's a lot, and it's a very depressing thought. Could you, and it's a very condensed statement with a lot of technical terms, and it's very heavy. So let's back off and let's go through it. What is this Wigner dust? What does it mean? What has happened? All that we know is that we've had a lot of stuff going on around reactor number 4. There's a lot of conflicting information in the media. Yes, it is ready. Yes, it is doing damage. No, it's safe. Yes, it is. No, it's safe. It's impossible to get any reliable information in the mainstream media. Impossible. And it's impossible to really understand what's going on. and it's impossible to understand what's really happening at the plant there. So could you really translate what you just said into what myself and just a normal person in the street could understand?
What I'm going to do is go back and go over the physical state of Fukushima now. What happened in the past is past, but the condition of the plant now is going to add additional radiation to our lives and our bodies, and it's transforming the entire planet, the whole global community, the international financial institutions. There's nothing that it is not touching. So I'm also going to give reliable sources. I've been on 20 speaking tours of Japan between the year 2000 and 2010. I spoke and consulted and advised members of the Japanese parliament. I did many press conferences all over Japan with all of the newspapers and media sources. I did 20 speaking tours all over the country. I've been in the nuclear power plants. I've met with TEPCO. I even took Dr. Ernest Sternglass on a 1-month speaking tour in about 2005. And so I know these sources are reliable, and I will be quoting the sources. People can read the paper. There are 100 references. They can go to the original material. This is an education effort to educate the public, the Japanese, the media, whoever is listening. But I know the information is good. Now, Prime Minister Nato Kan was the Prime Minister of Japan, and he was in a budget meeting in the Diet, that's the Japanese parliament, when the earthquake happened at 2:46 p.m. Japan time in the afternoon. And there are images of him in the meeting. Everybody's rocking back and forth as the earthquake's shaking all the chandeliers and everything. And he has been extremely honest in speaking out about what happened, and who would know better than he does? He was there and he was in charge of the country. And what he stated was that all of the reactors, 1 through 4, had melted down by 7 p.m. after that earthquake. They went into meltdown immediately after the earthquake because all of the power lines were cut off. There was no outside electrical power coming into the plant, and none of the backup systems were able to function properly or even to get them started because the STUXNET virus had sabotaged the whole control system of the Fukushima plant. Now, reactors 5 and 6 were also damaged, and apparently at least one of them had fuel in it, but they usually say that nothing happened to them. That's not true. The meltdown started within 15 minutes after the earthquake happened, and these reactors were already in heavy meltdown before the tsunami even hit the plant at 3:29. 3:30 p.m. At 3:29, a radiation detector about a mile from Reactor 1 was reporting radiation contamination leaks from the power plant. So that means that the reactor fuel was melted and probably fissioning. Yoichi Shimatsu, who was an editor of the Japan Times Weekly, has written a lot about it. And he wrote that Reactor 4, and that article is in my reference list also, so people can go and read it, and I recommend that they do. But he said Reactor 4 was loaded with a special MOX fuel. This is a new formula with highly enriched plutonium. It was hotter than the MOX fuel in Reactor 3. And guess what? Guess who was there that morning? It was a Mossad security group from Dimona in Israel and General Electric, and they're the ones who put the MOX fuel in the STUXNET in the Fukushima operating system and reactors secretly in September of 2010. So here they are on the morning of the disaster, March 11th, 2011, back in the Fukushima plant, and they were upgrading a shroud that covers part of the reactor, and there was no reason to upgrade it unless they were putting a different, much hotter fuel in it. It wasn't an old shroud, and there was no justification for doing that except the fuel had been changed to a much hotter fuel. There were 202 MOX fuel rods in the spent fuel pool near the reactor. And what Yoichi Shimatsu also reported is that the military came in a few days later in a helicopter and removed a U.S. nuclear weapons military toy from the pool where the MOX fuel rods were stored. And there were also MOX fuel rods that were on the ground beside the reactor. They'd been putting them in, and everybody ran away when the earthquake and tsunami happened. Now, that military toy that the Japanese military removed was from Amarillo, Texas. That's all U.S. nuclear weapons facilities. This meltdown and disaster was actually modeled for the Department of Energy in about 1984, and it's called the Browns Ferry Simulated Meltdown for DOE and General Electric. The title is Station Blackout at Browns Ferry Unit 1, and exactly the same reactors were at Browns Ferry that were at Fukushima. And there's GE involved in all of this, and the Department of Energy, of course. So the simulation, actually I used it after the disaster to track and monitor and predict what would happen at Fukushima, and it was absolutely right on. It was correct. It told when the corium would burn through the floorboard of the reactor. Everything was just as they had predicted. And actually a year later, TEPCO finally came out with a PowerPoint that confirmed exactly what the Browns Ferry report predicted and what I had been saying. So the Japanese Parliament commissioned an independent committee to investigate and make a report, an independent report on the Fukushima disaster, and they concluded that Reactor 3 and the spent fuel pool in Unit 4 the MOX had gone into meltdown. And there were even more meltdowns in mid-March, the March 21st to 22nd. Takasaka, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Station. These are independent. They're all over the world. They did the best reporting. But they measured levels of fission products that indicate multiple events were going on. There is a ratio of 2 xenon isotopes that they use all over the world to monitor for potential illegal nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere. And all of these indicators were there. And we know from the radiation monitor a mile from Unit 1 that we know that it was already leaking fission products. The Mainichi Shimbun newspaper and TEPCO themselves finally admitted that the Reactor 4 pool had 202 fresh MOX fuel rods in it. And of course, that's what melted and continued melting over the weeks ahead. Now, Kei Sugaoka is a friend of mine. He's a GE inspector, nuclear power plant inspector. He's worked all over the world, and he actually went to the governor of Fukushima Prefecture in 2002, I believe, or 2000, and he warned him that they were putting MOX fuel in these reactors and that it was very unstable and dangerous, and because it has plutonium in it. And the governor passed a law that no MOX fuel could ever be used in any reactors in Fukushima Prefecture. So what GE and the Dimona Mossad security group did was completely illegal. The unirradiated rods, scientists have made statements in the pool. If there's a fire and a meltdown, the plutonium goes into a very dangerous phase where it releases pulsed neutrons, very, very powerful bursts that can go a very long distance. Now, ABC News Australia reported that 4 nuclear power plants near Fukushima had been damaged. And that was Fukushima Daiichi, the one we're talking about, where the disaster happened. Fukushima Daini, which is only 10 kilometers, 6 miles away to the south. Onagawa to the north of Fukushima, and Tokai Daini, number 2. I heard, because I had Japanese staying here who translated all the news, Japanese news, they told me that at least 7 reactors in Japan had been damaged by the Fukushima earthquake. Now, Russian scientists have now published a landmark scientific paper titled The Fukushima Plutonium Effect. So this puts the Fukushima disaster and the neutron pulsing on the map in terms of the scientific community. It was a new phenomenon. It's different from Sam Cohen's neutron bomb. He invented it. It's different from the China neutron bomb, which they detonated a few years ago. I have photographs of it. And it's different from the U.S. neutron mini nukes. They're called 4th generation nuclear weapons. And they're using these all over the battlefields. They're launched from howitzers for big, heavy artillery. And this is having the effect of leaving the infrastructure there. We know from bomb crater analyses from the attack on Lebanon by Israel that U.S. bombs were used. They were transported to Israel. They had the neutron bomb inside the depleted uranium bunker buster, 2 nuclear wars in 1 bomb. And what happens is the infrastructure is left untouched, but the neutrons have exactly what the Wigner effect has. These neutrons pass through human bodies. They cause radiation-related illnesses and sickness and long lingering deaths. And so it's really an attack on the civilian population without having the radiation fingerprint. They are radioactive, the bomb craters, for about 2 weeks. New York City, the deuterium and tritium fingerprint was found in the aerosolized, dusted everything, collected around New York City for 5 months. And the scientist who was asked informally to monitor 9/11 from a rooftop a mile away with his specialized equipment. His name is Dr. Cahill from UC Davis. He's an expert on atmospheric pollution. And he took his equipment, but he was not asked to do it until that 2-week period was over, when there was evidence of radioactivity. After 2 weeks, it's called neutron activation. The radiation disappears, and it just looks like a normal bomb crater. So this is a very different nuclear weapon. It's using a nuclear power plant as a pulsed neutron weapon source. And it certainly probably damaged those other 3 reactors around Fukushima, and could have damaged more. But also it bombarded the whole population within hundreds of miles. And the USS Ronald Reagan, big aircraft carrier, was 2.5 miles offshore from the Fukushima plant when it blew up. And the Navy certainly knew it was going to blow up. They had radiation monitors that said it was leaking, and yet they sat there until Fukushima blew up. So the whole aircraft carrier and everybody on it was exposed to radiation. The planes were all contaminated. And so it was taken back to the U.S. and out of commission. Oh, the whole crew is sick and dying, and it's just a disaster. But last week, in the last couple of weeks, that would be late May or early June, the news reported that the USS Ronald Reagan had been recommissioned. There's no way to decontaminate it. So they've put it back on the high seas, and I don't know what they're going to use it for, but any troublemakers in the Navy could end up being assigned to that ship, and that would be a real good way to get rid of them, radiation illness. So on March 14th, the MOX fuel melted. It was burning up, and there was a blow up. That was in Unit 3 that launched all those thousands of fuel rods into the sky. Pieces are all over Japan, and particulates are all over the world. From that one explosion, the hydrogen explosions were nothing. That was white smoke. It didn't release burned fuel rods into nano-sized particles all over the atmosphere and into the ocean. So the hydrogen explosions were minimal compared to Reactor 3 and the spent fuel pool in Reactor Building 4 burning. Now, that was reported in The Guardian. They had a videotape of that explosion. All of the videotapes of that explosion in the U.S. have been photoshopped, and the telltale bright orange heat. It was so hot in the reactor building right before it blew up that you could see the orange heat through the walls of the building. It looked like a candle that had been burning for a while. It was very, very hot, thousands of degrees centigrade. In July 2011, Alfred, if you remember, all agencies, official agencies, government agencies, and even the Independent Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty laboratories and facilities stopped reporting any information about the radiation, the contaminants they were identifying, the isotopes, or the amounts. But if you look at the increase in death rates, if you look at infant mortality, if you look at the releases that were reported before they stopped reporting in July 2011, you can see these spikes, and each of those spikes is another criticality event or spent fuel rods burning in the dried pools. All of those pools were damaged by the earthquake. And they were damaged, I want to emphasize, before the tsunami. TEPCO wants to blame everything on the tsunami. That's so they can do more of these disasters and accidents. But the whole nuclear industry is a gigantic booby trap in every way to poison the global population. And for instance, the backup diesel generators that were the emergency backup, they had batteries too, they were wired for 12-volt electricity, and they had the wrong voltage on the backup diesel generators for the reactors. So you can't run a diesel generating backup unless you have the right compatible voltage as the reactor. There were many other things. For instance, the pad that the whole plant is sitting on was 35 meters high. It never would have, that accident never would have happened. The tsunami wouldn't have hit it. The earthquake wouldn't have damaged it so much because it was on landfill. But it was cut down to, I think, 10 meters off the ground for the platform, and it was landfill. So it just undermined the safety. It sabotaged the safety of the plant. There were lots of other things too. So by July of 2013, all this huge steam and fog and mist was suddenly being reported in newspapers and media all over the world, covering the whole lagoon, the open ocean there in front of the nuclear power plant. And that indicated that the molten fuel that dripped out of the reactors burned through the floorboard of the plant and formed these big blobs underground. They're called elephant's feet from Chernobyl. It means that had melted down and then followed the geologic structure subsurface to follow the path of least resistance to the lagoon. And that corium is so hot, it's continuing to fission, that it started boiling the water in the lagoon offshore from Fukushima. That was reported by NHK. There are photos. There's a photo also in the article that we've posted. So, do you have some questions?
Well, I'm still working on the original question, which has to do exactly what is this breeder reactor that
Okay.
the Fukushima facility has now become. What do we mean by a breeder reactor? What is this Wigner dust? What does that affect? Is this being carried worldwide? What are the impacts of that?
Yes.
I mean, this raises a whole new series of questions, and so
Yes.
I'm still working on that. I mean, it's very useful, all of this background that you're giving. So
Right.
that is still what I'm working on.
Okay, so, well, let's just ask one question. Who did it? The Tromsø, Norway HAARP facility in Norway is owned by a supranational consortium of countries, and it's called EISCAT, EISCAT. So it's owned by Britain, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Japan, and China. And that basically is the bankers. And they are transforming the global economy to they're taking down the Western economy. Fukushima is part of the methodology in order to build up, to pump the middle space, which is China and Russia, for a new global economy. So they have to break down the existing one, and that just happens to be us, unfortunately. So now we're going to talk about, I just wanted to mention the hydrovolcanic nuclear explosions. These are underground. They were predicted, and they started in December 2013. They're releasing radiation too. But let's go to the black dust. This is high temperature MOX fuel particulates and nanoparticles, and why they're toxic and how they're toxic. And they're quite different. The particulates that are being formed by the Wigner effect are that's caused by bombardment of particularly metals by neutrons or any of the energy from the nucleus, gamma rays, alpha particles, beta particles, X-rays. All of those come out of the nucleus of radioactive isotopes. And what they're doing is poking holes and making dislocations in the crystalline matrix, the atomic matrix of the metals and all other materials too, by the way, including humans. And it's this was first reported at Chernobyl, when the scientists went down after 10 or 15 years into the basement to look at the elephant feet, and they saw this coating of dust, and every time they went back, the dust was thicker. Well, that is from the disintegration of the surface atoms of, for instance, metal, and it just turns it to dust as it eats down through the metal, weakening the metal and brittling it. And this has a very serious implication now, because it means the entire infrastructure of the Fukushima power plant, of Japan, of airplanes, of the entire infrastructure of the planet now is being bombarded daily, nightly, 24 hours a day with Fukushima radiation. And it's breaking down the global infrastructure and the global population, all living things. Now,
that's what you call the Wigner effect.
Yeah, that's the Wigner effect.
Okay, the effect of radiation on matter.
Yes.
Okay.
And so it is creating particulates, dust, particles that are highly mobile. They're very, very radioactive, and they're full of for instance, the fuel rods. There are pieces of them flying all over everywhere. They flew everywhere, all over Japan. Well, they are disintegrating too, and that's releasing particulates that a lot of them have plutonium and uranium in them. That goes into people's lungs. And I can tell you that by 1963, at the end of nuclear bomb testing, atmospheric testing, compared to lung cancer rates in England from 1850 to 1860, before man-made radiation existed, lung cancer has increased by 1963 in Hawaii 17,000%. That's from nuclear technologies. And that's called a pathway cancer. So we're going to see huge increases in pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, mouth cancer, throat cancer, tongue cancer, stomach cancer, colon cancer, all of the areas in the body, the organs and everything, kidney cancer, that anything carrying food or liquids through the body is going to be damaging the pathway organs and pathways through the body first. And that also, cesium has a horrific effect on the heart. So we have a planet of death and illnesses that is increasing every day. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know that doctors in Japan, yes.
No, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
I know that doctors in Japan in the Fukushima area put their patients and their families on a macrobiotic diet. It's brown rice, miso, umaibashi, which is salty plum paste. You can buy that in a Japanese store, salty plum paste. And tsukomoni, which is pickled vegetables and fruit too, done the traditional Japanese way. And I actually make it in my refrigerator. I buy a little jar or container of probiotic sauerkraut, and then I just pour the juice off, and I use that to start the probiotic process. Now, the doctors who have used that in the Fukushima area report that their families are healthy and their workers are healthy, but anyone on a Western diet is sick, dying, or dead already, just 3 years after the disaster.
Now, this is what I was going to intervene with. Do we have any public health data, or is there any data at all that's existing now, or patterns that are coming in, that we can say that there's an increase in mortality or deaths or cancers or impacts of that we could say are attributable to Fukushima at all?
Yes, very, very, very good data. It's from the Centers for Disease Control. That's a U.S. official reporting agency. Every county in the U.S. reports to that agency once a week. That's what he used, and you can bet they cheat on what they're reporting, because they do. They're trying to protect the government. But Robert Soltysik, we call him Bobby One, is a statistician, a very good statistician, and he works a lot with epidemiologists. So he spent months crunching the data from the Centers for Disease Control. And by the end of the year 2011, he had calculated, using CDC data, that, with their numbers, it came out to be 53,000 Americans had already died. These are unexplained death rates that increase, and there's no explanation for them, because you look at the last 3 or 6 years, and if you see a steady trend, you know that a huge stepped increase suddenly in a few months or less than a year is got to be an environmental cause, since it's all over the United States. So he has a website called optimalprediction.com. And he estimates, actually, he said the CDC data isn't that good, and he did not include children, babies, newborns, or spontaneous abortions. I also want to mention the embryos within the first 2 or 3 weeks after conception. Even from low-level radiation exposure, in my studies, 80% of the embryos die from any radiation exposure. Very, very low, it just kills them. So I said, Bobby, I think at least 100,000 died if you include children and newborns and everything. He said he said, well, I would say it's 100,000 just because of the way the CDC reports their data and everything. It's very conservative. He said, I would estimate at least 100,000 had died, and that is not including the children, babies, and the pre-birth babies that are still in utero. So they did report on May 6, 2014, in Norway, there's a scientific publication reporting that hot particles from uranium, plutonium, spent fuel were trapped in air filters April 1st to 4th, 2011. And the scientists concluded that this is radiation from the burning or the burning or melted spent fuel and the reactors, the fuel in the reactors. And they said it did not come to Norway across Asia. It came to Norway over the Canadian Arctic or through Canada and the United States. And that would be air masses, the jet stream, whatever. A lot of the air moves from west to east because of the earth spinning and so forth and so on. So yes, we do have data on the death rates. When you look at the regions he analyzed, it illustrates what I always say: the radiation levels that people are being exposed to locally depend on weather and geography. And just because you're on the East Coast or in Florida or Canada, in Halifax or whatever, doesn't mean that you're safe. The radiation levels were even higher in one city in Florida and in Pittsburgh than they were out here in California. So it depends on the geography and the weather. How much rain out and snow also is very efficient at removing radioactive particles from air masses. Now, we have autoradiographs from Japan showing these hot particles in tree twigs and leaves. We have autoradiograph from soil from a temple in northern Japan, and an autoradiograph, a very famous one by Dr. Moret, of a bird. He laid it on this special radiation sensitive paper. Sometimes you have to leave it there for a month. And you could see that most of these hot particles were on the flight feathers on the wings and in the stomach and gut of the bird because the food it ate was contaminated as well as the water. They have also been reported from individual events in all over the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia. This stuff is all over the place, and it's completely mixed in the whole global atmosphere in 1 year. We have a photograph, scanning electron microscope photo of depleted uranium particulates. That was from 1979. That's in my report. And people can see what they look like. They're little tiny round hollow spheres. And what happens is when the temperatures are 3,000 to 5,000 degrees centigrade or even 2,000, the metal, these radioactive metals, they vaporize and they form a gas. And then as the cold air around them moves in and chills them, they form hollow round spheres that float in air currents and stay suspended all over the world. And then you have a whole lot more of them are produced per kilogram of spent fuel because they're hollow inside. So it's a huge multiplier effect, and the chemistry happens on the surface of these particulates. Nanoparticles are much smaller, and you can't even see them under a special scanning electron microscope. They're so tiny. They're a tenth of a micron or smaller in diameter. And they have three very, very, very toxic effects. One is the chemical effect. Uranium, for instance, is a hormone and estrogen disruptor. It can sterilize, it can cause endometriosis, it's feminizing men and masculinizing women because it's disturbing the hormones and the hormonal balance. And then the radiation effect, that's the alpha particle or beta particle and gamma or X-rays that are released from the nucleus of the radioactive atom. And they each have a different pathway, a different energy, and a different effect. The most devastating effect of nanoparticles, and the Fukushima plant is producing huge volumes of nanoparticles because the heat is so high. And that effect is called the catalytic or enzyme effect, nonspecific catalyst, nonspecific enzyme. And those are carried in the cholesterol and lipids in the blood. They go right into the cells. And in a cell, it's a syncopated dance, so that there are specific steps. Each one is turned on or off with a very specific enzyme or catalyst that the body makes and releases. And these nanoparticles are non-specific, so they go in like throwing wild cards or fairy dust, toxic fairy dust, into the cell, and they cause all kinds of dysfunction because things are turning on and off, and it'd be like letting a whole bunch of small kids in a room with light switches all over the room, and they'd be turning them on and off and making the room really crazy with the light. Well, that's what the nanoparticles do in the cell.
Now, let me ask you, because we're moving along in this segment. We've discussed, and you've written about, that the purpose of this Fukushima, let's call it weapon of mass destruction, is an intentional depopulation and ecocidal mission to depopulate the planet, to reduce the population, and that even the weather warfare capabilities of HAARP are used to move the radiation around intentionally. Could you talk about that with more precision and link it in with the recent discoveries that you've made with this new Wigner effect, and give us more of a sense of the dynamics of how these controllers have been using Fukushima as a weapon of mass destruction in a way that neither the media, so that the media and the world population are not aware of what's happening.
They're not allowed to talk about it either.
Yeah.
General Electric and Westinghouse own ABC and NBC. So the media is controlled by them. The corporations control them. It's a huge cover-up. But let's go back to Oak Ridge Nuclear Weapons Lab in Tennessee. This is kind of where it started. And it's where a scientist named Dr. Wigner came in around World War II from the Vienna School. He was part of the sort of the Habsburg territories, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Holy Roman Empire before that. And this is where many of these scientists came from who are involved in these depopulation programs. Edward Teller, for instance, came from Hungary. He had a Rockefeller fellowship before he was a grad student in Hungary when he got that. and he came through Niels Bohr's lab in Copenhagen and got a helicopter ride into Washington, D.C. Okay, Edward Teller ended up being called Dr. Strangelove for very good reasons. He loved bombs. He loved the hydrogen bomb. He loved destroying people and things. Basically, he was a psychopath. And he's the one who came up with the plan to dump the fluoride from the uranium enrichment process and depleted uranium into the U.S. public drinking supply. Now, people believe that his philosophy was that dilution is the solution to pollution. But in fact, when you put him together with Wigner, who studied the biological and the other effects of radiation on metals, which is to turn everything into dust, break the bonds of the molecules and so forth. He was at Oak Ridge, and he had a number of Viennese or Austrian scientists who were always also sent there in World War II as refugees. And one of them, after he'd worked at Oak Ridge in the radiation field, he was hired as CEO of Monsanto. So the Monsanto food modification, genetic modification, is sandwiched in and carefully interacts with the radiation effects that Wigner described, and the fluoride and other chemicals that they're putting in drinking water now, that Teller was the father of that program. So that's pretty much most of these depopulation eugenics programs, even going back to the 1500s, came out of the Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, so there are those three interacting. It's a ternary weapon system where 1 + 1 + 1 on their own, they're not so bad, or they have modest effects. But when you put them together and people are ingesting those and inhaling them and everything, there's a huge multiplier effect, so you can use less and get a higher kill rate. Now, Putin said a week ago, we will have no GMO food in Russia. He completely banned it. And China this week, the military generals came out and they have banned any GMO food in the military. And guess where that GMO food is coming from in China? It's coming out of the universities. So there it is, the universities again, just setting countries up, setting up populations for these death traps. So now there's a gamma cloud over Fukushima that's coming out of the hundreds and hundreds or thousands of water tanks they put up in emergency to hold the contaminated water coming out of the plant instead of dumping it in the ocean. But TEPCO's already said we're going to dump it all in the ocean. But they are releasing beta radiation and causing a gamma cloud over the whole Fukushima reactor plant, and that's just accelerating the disintegration of the whole infrastructure. There are buildings leaning over, there are cranes collapsing for no reason. Every single day the workers are complaining that it just gets worse and worse and worse at Fukushima. The Bremsstrahlung effect is from neutrons slowing down, and they release energy that form other kinds of energy. They have effects on other atoms, and it's energy exchange or flow. Now the airline industry is right now, it's the first industry that I've been able to track or identify that is really having a lot of trouble more and more every day with the Wigner effect, weakening metals. And what happened is at the beginning of 2014 or the end of 2013, planes flying across the Pacific, which is the most contaminated area because of the Fukushima constant releases. And these commercial planes, passenger planes, were, and they still are, it's every day now, are making emergency landings on Guam, Hawaii, Pacific Islands, where they need to repair their hydraulics, especially in the landing gear, because where the rubber hoses are attached to hardware in the landing gear, and these are under high pressure hydraulics, the metal's very thin that they crimp the hose on to the metal fixture with. And because the metal's very thin, the Wigner effects have a greater effect than on thick pieces of metal and much faster. We also know that 14 military jets at the Kadena Air Base in Okinawa have been losing pieces in midair. Pieces of the military jets are just falling off the plane while they're flying around. And 4 of them lost windshields. The jet pilots had to land those planes without windshields. The spent fuel pools, the rods, are in very dangerous condition. There are indications that these neutron pulses are happening frequently, releasing more neutrons and more radiation and fission products and Wigner dust and everything into the global atmosphere. And there's a video, TEPCO, from their perimeter camera in my article at the very end of it. And these workers are removing, very, very dangerous job. They're removing spent fuel rods and also the new MOX fuel rods from the fuel pools in Reactor 4. The U.S. ordered them to do this last summer. And they're standing there with a crane putting the rod assemblies into dry casks for dry cask storage. And right behind them, there's 6 workmen there. Right behind them, one of the 5 cranes in the background just slowly collapses onto the ground. What if that had happened to, what if that had happened in, while they were using it, what if they'd been using it on that operation? It just would have been another nuclear disaster. Now, what I forgot to say about the Japanese airline schedules, the domestic airlines, there's Vanilla, I've forgotten what all the names are.
Peach Airlines.
Peach Airlines. They have 4 domestic airlines, and one of them had to cancel something like 1,700 flights until next fall at the earliest, because they couldn't get pilots, and because of the maintenance on the outside of the airplane didn't go as planned. So basically they've shut their airline down for 6 months. Now the pilots, they can't get pilots because the pilots are dead and dying. This is all over the Northern Hemisphere. I talked to a German pilot. He said some of the pilots are sick, but he said some of them are dead in their 40s. But he said, we're all sick, everyone. So I read him a list of diagnoses in 631,000 the 2003 Iraq War veterans, just 3 years after they came back. And I stopped reading and I said, do you have any of these symptoms? He didn't say anything. And I said, do any of these sound familiar to you? He said, I have all of them. And he wasn't even 40.
Yeah, so this is clearly a workplace hazard because being so many hours in the atmosphere and being exposed to plumes of radiation in
That's
the
right.
atmosphere. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so we know now that the crews and the pilots, anyone flying frequently, celebrities, Christina Consolo and I did some very good interviews on celebrities who are sick, and some of them have died from, look how much they fly. Look at Kim Kardashian, and she was pregnant, flying all over the world every week or day or whatever. No one should be flying unless they absolutely have to. If you can drive or take a train or a bus or get a ride on Craigslist, people should avoid flying, and they will not let you
Yeah.
take your Geiger counter on the plane anymore.
By the way, we're going to reserve a segment. We've just now gone 60 minutes, but we're going to reserve a segment toward the end of this program for solutions, because we have to do that both at the personal level and at the macro global level. So let's spend the next 5 minutes sort of summarizing where we are, and then shift into some solutions both at the personal level and then at the societal level that humanity could take to deal with this planetary catastrophe.
Well, basically, when you look at the history of nuclear science, physics, nuclear physics, it goes back to pre-1900. And there were Japanese scientists like Matsutaro Shiriki, Yasuhiro Nakasone. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's the wrong one. Just a minute. I'm sorry. Anyway, there were early scientists in Japan who, in the early 1900s, they were in Europe, going to the Vienna School, to Göttingen, to Berlin, all the universities, the Cavendish Lab in England. They were making the rounds there, and they came back to Japan, and Japan's atomic bomb program started then, because all those countries, all those scientists knew that nuclear energy could be used for power, for electricity, to generate electricity, or for military weapons. And in fact, Japan's industrialist named Jun, where is his name? Anyway, there was an industrialist in Japan who was making heavy water even as early as 1928. And Japan had a facility in the northern part of Korea, which is where their operations for manufacturing the bombs, testing them, and so forth happened. The theoretical and the experimental work was done in Japan, and Dr. Nishini came back from Europe in 1930 after his tour, and he brought an Austrian engineer called Dr. Fritz Hansberg with him. And Hansberg actually worked for the US, Japan. He gave information to Russia, Britain, and probably Germany, and he developed the template for all of those nuclear weapons programs. They're all practically the same. And so this is going back to where Teller and Wigner and Muller, who studied the biological effects of radiation before 1920, they all came out of the Vienna School, out of that Habsburg Empire. And I've never heard anyone talk about that, but when you look up all their backgrounds, and Meissner, the economist from Vienna, he was a eugenicist. All these scientists were absolutely believed in eugenics. So I'm not that surprised that they. Oh, Jun Noguchi was the industrialist who was manufacturing heavy water in North Korea before 1928. And Hansberg developed a very good, very cheap process for producing heavy water. That was for the Japanese, and also for producing very pure magnesium, which is how they extracted the uranium from the ore so that they could enrich the uranium in 235 and make, that was the Hiroshima bomb. And it's amazing that they started that early. But even the CIA, in their declassified documents, they talk about him and his methods. So how did they know? Well, they were all working together, and I discovered in Bancroft Library collections of Henry Kaiser, and Kaiser and Bechtel were partners in the 20s and 30s, or the 30s and 40s. And actually, Henry Kaiser hired Hansberg to come and run a magnesium plant in Los Altos, which is the San Francisco Bay Area. And he got arrested in World War II, 1941 or 42, because he was German or Austrian. And the guy who had him arrested got fired because they needed him to make the magnesium for the U.S. bomb program, atomic bomb program. And he's actually listed in the Kaiser documents as working on the bomb project. So there it is. He made the template for all the programs: Russia, the U.S., Japan, England, and probably Germany. They're all the same.
Right, all from single persons.
Yes.
Okay, so we've sort of laid this mega problem on the table. Now, what can we do to correct this? Is this just a fait accompli that this planet is going to be ecocided, and that we as a human species are going to be extincted? Is that your conclusion?
Well, the bankers and collaborators and proliferators of this nightmare, they have to be protecting themselves. So what I know from working on radiation and prevention of ingestion and exposure is that diet and drinking water are the two most important factors in mitigating the effects of it. The most important thing is to get a water filtration system, a reverse osmosis filter system. This is used to desalinate seawater, and it's very drinkable. But it is the only filtering system that removes most of the radiation. It cannot remove tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, because it attaches to water, and there's no way to chemically separate it easily. So that is the number one thing. And on my website, our website, LeurenMoret.info, if you go to lifestyle, we have a write-up on the reverse osmosis system. We installed it ourselves under the kitchen sink, and it removes the fluoride, the other nasty chemicals that are now being added by city municipalities' water supplies to accelerate the deaths and illness rates. It's all deliberate. It's all depopulation. There's no denial about it. And it takes all of that out. I can tell you, Alfred, within 12 hours of drinking that filtered water, reverse osmosis filtered water, and it tastes good too, I could feel a difference in how my brain was functioning. It was much clearer. It was like a fog had disappeared. So fluoride has been used for a long time by Asian despots. They used it in the Nazi slave camps. Very, very important to keep chemicals out of the drinking water, especially for children, but especially everybody. Now, if you can't afford the filtration system, it's about $300 or $350. You can order it from Amazon. We put the manufacturer that we bought. We don't get any profit or anything from it. It's just well researched and it works because we've been drinking it. Costco, apparently, a lot of people complained that it flooded their kitchens. So you don't want to get a cheap one or just grab one off the shelf. You really want to do your homework. And if you don't do your homework, go use our homework. It's on the site in Lifestyles. So drinking water's number one. Avoid dairy products. Drinking water and dairy products are the two main pathways for radiation into the body. So now diet, what you want to do is when you can eat root vegetables that grow down in the soil, you want to scrub them with a brush, get all the dirt and particles off of them, and then you want to boil them for 5 minutes and throw that water away with the radiation it removes from the surface of the root vegetable. And then you just cook them the way you normally do or had planned to. Most of the radiation is in the upper 2.5 centimeters of the upper dust level. And so don't go out when it's windy, when it's seasonal changes and a lot of dust is blowing around, because that's all remobilized and you're going to inhale it and you'll have lungs full of hot particles, which you sure don't want that. I would be very careful about letting children play in playgrounds and everything on dirt or sand surfaces. You want them to be on grass or asphalt or cement, something where you're not remobilizing loose dust. Another thing is to avoid fires. Don't burn firewood. Don't burn trash. You're creating radioactive smoke, potentially, if the material is contaminated. Now, the Japanese, as I mentioned, found that a macrobiotic diet really, really helps mitigating the effects of radiation. It counteracts the free radicals that are released by the energy of that's dumped along the path of the alpha particle or beta ray or gamma or X-ray. So it's brown rice, soybean paste, which is called miso. It's fermented. You can make soup or hot drinks or anything out of it. It's tasty. And tsukimono, which is the pickled Japanese vegetables, very easy to make. You put them in the refrigerator and let them sit there. Leave the skin on the outside. That's where the good bacteria come from that start the macrobiotic process. And then the fourth component is umaibashi, which is salty plum paste, and also you can eat fruit, lots of fruit, but peel the vegetables if you can. And you want to avoid crops that are grown on the surface. That happens to be salad and things like that. But I can tell you root vegetables are much more nutritional in general than a heavy lettuce vegetarian diet. So at all costs, do not eat anything out of fresh water, rivers, lakes, ponds, or from the ocean. No seaweed, no fish. Freshwater fish live in a smaller confined bowl of water, so they have higher levels of radiation in them than fish from the ocean in general. It depends on how much they're exposed to. Seaweed bioconcentrates radiation especially radioactive iodine, by 15,000 times at least. And also filter feeders, mussels, clams, sea urchins, things like that. They bioconcentrate radiation thousands of times, thousands and thousands of times. And the most important thing is to buy povidone 10% iodine. You can buy it over the counter, or you can ask the pharmacist to order it for you. It's $3.50, $3.50 for a 1 ounce tube of povidone iodine 10% ointment. You rub it on your skin, you rub it on scratches. If you're a diabetic, you rub it on any ulcers. The chemtrails are full of pathogens. I got staph infections around my hairline every time I don't wear a hat. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. They're chemtrailing 5 layers of planes every day all over the Bay Area. I got staph infections on my feet if I went outside barefooted or in sandals. And I've got these big watery blisters on the bottom of my feet out of the chemtrails. So that povidone iodine kills all staph in 6 seconds. It's deader than a doornail. I also dilute it and pour it over my hair as a rinse when I'm through with a shampoo. And I also wipe my whole face and eyelids and everything with it. This is povidone iodine. This is the tube. And this is from Walgreens. They're cheaper than other outlets for iodine. This is about, how much was this?
That one's about 14. You can also find it at Target.
Yeah, Target also has this. And that's a lot of iodine. You can dilute it down with a lot of water. And the ointment is the only medicine that I take when I travel around the world. I never go without this. Another thing to drink is lots of green tea. But do not buy green tea from Japan. It's all contaminated from Fukushima. Do not buy any food products from Japan.
Now, let's move more to the social level.
Okay.
What can we do societally to move this matrix death machine to turn the death machine off?
The reason I'm doing this is to educate people. I'm a scientist. I'm a radiation expert. I've worked in 2 nuclear weapons labs. I've been on 20 speaking tours to Japan. And I'm doing this out of my concern for humanity. I spent 18 hours a day for 10 years learning everything I could about radiation. And one of the last living Manhattan Project scientists from World War II, Marion Folk, he's in his 90s now, he taught me everything I know in his living room. It was the most wonderful experience, and what people will find is when they begin reading my articles and my information, they become empowered. I make science transparent, even very complex science, very transparent for the public, for young people, anybody who's interested. And it's fun because I put the history in and the personalities and all kinds of things I weave into these articles. So they're very informative, but they're really interesting too. And then people can begin writing their own articles using what they learned from mine. And that's a huge force multiplier effect that happened around the 2003 Iraq War. There were all kinds of people using my information. I don't care if you give me credit or not. Just put the right information out for people. And that information and those articles were going all over the world. So get informed, go to the right sources. And I have lots and lots of always references where people can go to original material, government, research, scientific community, media, whatever, and they can begin doing it themselves. And it's very empowering. It makes you not afraid. I'm not afraid of anything now. I used to be. But this is the issue that I want to work on because I can. This is my contribution to humanity. And each of us, if we do start out with just a small thing, write a letter to the editor of your local paper or magazine. Just start there. I couldn't believe it. That was the first thing I ever did, and they published it. Well, then I wanted to do more. So start small and just let the path open before you. And all of a sudden, the right people start coming to help you. And as a global community, we will challenge this. We will find answers and remedies and possibilities. And don't forget to include young people. They are cutting edge. They're young and bright. They haven't been socialized to be dumbed down. And they're going to have lots of solutions as well.
Now, let me take you down this path, or let me suggest that we go down this path. We've had the conversation, in fact, I've asked you that there is one tool that could begin to reverse the effects of the radiation that's in the atmosphere and on the oceans and on the land masses of the planet from Fukushima and from atmospheric testing and from DU. And that's the HAARP chemtrails weapon system, correct?
That's correct.
So
it's misapplied. It is science that has been misapplied to benefit the bankers.
Yeah. So that would mean that we would somehow either have to reach the controllers to make a decision to apply that weapon system to reverse the radiation, or we would have to displace the controllers from control of that system, then control the system ourselves to reverse the radiation. Those are two options, correct?
Correct.
Well, why not embark upon that project? That's a project that really turns me on.
If more and more people just went out and sat in their front yards in lawn chairs, if more and more people did that so that they were visible, that would be the best way to counteract this of all.
What do you mean?
All the solutions, that would be the most empowering, non-bloodshed way to rebel against this global extinction. We're all being exterminated.
Yeah, so I don't get the connection between sitting on your lawn chair and reversing HAARP.
You're visibly noticeable to them. And they don't want the masses to wake up. That's why all the deception in the media. Who's telling the truth like I am? No one.
Okay, so what is there? How can we trigger this kind of awakening to turn off the death machines?
We just have to keep talking and putting the information out and suggesting to people just what they can do. There are lots of things they can do. They will find their own solutions to challenging this. But this is a global extermination. They're exterminating us. They're exterminating our children, our grandchildren, and the future of our bloodlines. They are absolutely exterminating the planet, and they've said they were going to do it.
Good. Okay, so we've come to the end of this segment. What words would you like to leave our viewers with as the next step?
Well, I think that people should definitely, number one, the water and food supply. go and take care of that first. And if you can't afford a reverse osmosis filter, a lot of grocery stores sell reverse osmosis filtered water by the gallon. Go and buy that. If you can't get that, drink distilled water. You can buy that by the gallon. People put it in their irons or whatever they want to do with it. Change your diet. You're going to feel better anyway. All the food is weaponized. The food streams in America are changing so rapidly to one source, single source. If you buy chicken or ducks now, and you cook them, a horrible smell fills your whole house and your kitchen. I can't stand to be in the kitchen now for 6 hours after I bake these chickens. They're full of poisons, and when you boil them to make a broth, boil a whole chicken to make a broth and take the meat off the chicken, there's half an inch of gray, nasty scum on the top of the broth. No wonder it smells so bad. And just read on the internet what they're putting in chicken feed now. Arsenic and a chicken egg before it hatches is put on a conveyor belt. This is PETA wrote about this. They have a website, PETA, and that eggshell, that egg, when the chick is just ready to hatch, gets 6 injections. It's vaccines, it's chemicals, it's all kinds of garbage that they're putting into that little chick before it even hatches. Well, we don't want that in our body. We don't know what those chemicals do. But I have a really good guess. They sterilize you, they make you sick, they poison your organs, and they make you die sooner. Why are we eating that food?
Right, right. Good.
Beware.
And then join us in turning off the HAARP death machine.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yes, share this information with people. Don't worry about your family or your friends. They're going to say, well, I don't believe you. I don't want to hear it. Your kids may say that too. Just tell them anyway, because you know what? Within 2 months, within a year, within 3 years, they're going to come back to you and say, oh, you know, when you told me that, well, I want to know more.
Yeah.
I saw that happen, or somebody else told me about it, or I tasted that and it was awful, and I remembered what you said. I have a great example. I have a friend who is Japanese American, and I told him when Fukushima happened, I said, go get a Geiger counter and don't eat anything out of the Pacific Ocean from now on. So this was in January of 2014, this year. He called me up in a panic. He said, Leuren, I just couldn't stand it. I love crab and all the stuff inside the shell. It's a delicacy. So I bought a crab and I took it home, and I wouldn't let the butcher cut it up. I wanted to do it myself. He said, so I was cutting it up and breaking the pieces open, and I started to taste it, and I went, oh, wait, Leuren told me, I better test this. He ran in his bedroom and got the Geiger counter and came back to the kitchen. Brrr, that crab was hotter than heck. He wrapped it up to take it back to the butcher to get his money back and cleaned the counters off. He said, I couldn't get the radiation off of my hands, off of the counter. It was under my fingernails. I couldn't get rid of it. He said, oh, I'm so glad I remembered what you had told me. That's why we can't eat seafood anymore or fish out of freshwater bodies of water, because we don't know what's in it.
Well, we've come to the end of this segment, and we want to thank you very much for taking time to be with us. We've in the video description section, we have a link to your massive research paper that will give all of the background and documentation to everything that you've said today. And we look forward sure you're joining us again with updates as events develop, Leuren.
Thank you, Alfred, and thank you everyone who's watching and has watched this. Please pass it around, and the website is LeurenMoret.info. And the button to push to get this article that I wrote that this interview is about is LeurenMoret.info. Takes you to the homepage, and just click on currents. Those are my current articles, current interviews, and this interview will go up there as well.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Yeah, thank you, Leuren.